I'm Steve Pleich, and I'll be your host for this evening's program on Voices from the Village. Tonight, we'll be discussing the highly controversial hydrocarbon extraction process known as chemical fracturing, or fracking. So what exactly is fracking? Fracking is the process of drilling and injecting fluids into the ground under high pressure, often as much as 15,000 pounds per square inch, in order to fracture shale rock to release natural gas and other substances. The first use of hydraulic fracturing was in 1947, but the modern fracking technique, called slickwater horizontal fracking, was first used in 1988. In this process, the energy from the injection of highly pressurized fluids creates new channels in the rock which can increase the extraction rates and ultimately the recovery volume of hydrocarbons. There are more than 27,000 wells in the United States, and each well uses between 1 and 8 million gallons of water and between 80 and 300 tons of chemicals each time it is fracked. Proponents say the use of fracking creates an economic benefit by enabling the extraction of vast amounts of previously inaccessible hydrocarbons and point to the potential environmental impacts. Opponents point to the potential environmental impacts of groundwater contamination, air quality, the migration of gases, hydraulic fracturing, and the like. Chemicals to the surface, and the potential serious and irreversible impacts on humans and animals. For these reasons, fracking has come under intense international scrutiny, with some countries even banning the process. Interestingly, our own state does not regulate this process. I'm sure that you're as eager as I am to learn more about this extremely controversial process, so let's get started. We're fortunate to have with us this evening a distinguished panel of experts in the subject of hydraulic fracturing. Let me first introduce Rose Braz, who is the Climate Campaign Director for the Center of Biological Diversity. Rose, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And Patricia Matejcek, Sierra Club activist.
Thank you, Steve.
And before we get started, we went out in Santa Cruz this week and we asked people what they knew about fracking. Let's see what they had to say.
My impression of fracking is that it's used to get natural gas out of the ground. It's pumping water into the Earth's surface to free up the natural gas resources and then using that to remove the natural gas.
And what do you think about that?
I have a kind of a neutral position. I think there's things that are not great about it. I think it's a way to capture our natural resources. I think if it's done carefully, it's probably something that we can work with.
Fracking, in my opinion, is similar to using Roundup on a garden or in somebody's landscape. I think if there's a proper place and if it's done right, then it's a good thing. But you don't want to destroy the earth with chemicals by overdoing chemicals all over the place and going hog wild with it. We're doing enough destroying the ozone on our own, so why add to the problem?
I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know that I'm not into it, and I know it's not good for our environment and our community, and I don't think that there's been enough investigation into the effects of it, and the long-term effects are completely unknown. So that's why I'm not too into it.
Well, I just think right now it seems like it's doing a lot of damage to groundwater. That's what they're finding out, but yet they keep pushing for it, and I think they need to do a little more research before they continue doing this. That's how I feel.
It's hydraulic pressure mining for oil shale, right? It seems that it has unproven deleterious effects on the environment. It's probably not studied well enough. I heard that they've been doing some oil exploration in Aromas, actually. I've just heard the rumor there was some undescribed cruise out there a few months back, and it caused a bunch of hoopla. I haven't heard anything recently, but I know that the local community leaders have been talking to their county supervisors and making a bunch of noise about it.
I'm sorry. I mean, I think that we should try alternative ways, absolutely, and I wouldn't be for it. But, you know, the bottom line is they usually do what they want to do anyhow. I mean, I would do what I could to make it not happen, but I don't know what that even is.
Well, fracking is really bad. It's bad for the environment. It pollutes the water. It destroys mountains and land, and I think we should conserve oil and energy instead of looking for new sources.
Fracking is super dangerous. It's really bad for the environment, and it forces us to be under more pressure than we're already in right now. I think we should make better choices with how we use the world and how we use our planet.
So not surprisingly, Santa Cruz is pretty well informed about fracking, pleasantly surprised in fact. So let's start talking about the process itself. Rose Braz, how is the Center for Biological Diversity and yourself engaged on the issue of fracking?
Well, after looking into the process of fracking and some of the impacts around fracking, we really came to the conclusion that what we need to do is ban fracking, that the risks to our air, our water, and our climate are simply too great to push forward this new method of oil and natural gas extraction. Here in California, you know, we have the Monterey Shale, and it runs across a big portion of the center of our state, very close, not too far from where we are right now, actually. And it's estimated that there's up to 14 billion barrels of oil in the Monterey Shale that is enticing a lot of oil and natural gas companies. Previously, these deposits were inaccessible. They were economically inaccessible and to some degree technologically challenging to get out. But with these new methods of fracking that you've been talking about, the new use of slick water, chemical concoctions, these potentially are accessible, and obviously this poses a great risk to our air, our climate, and our water sources.
Yeah. Patricia, you are a Sierra Club activist. Give us a little background on your engagement on this particular issue.
Well, I've certainly read a lot of things coming from the East Coast, where fracking has been taking over much of the state of Pennsylvania. But when it surfaced in our Central Coast region, principally in southern Monterey County, that's when the Sierra Club had an issue right squarely in its sights. And we, this Monterey Shale that Rose refers to does run from southern Monterey County into the Central Valley, over into Madera County. It's an enormous formation. And so as an organization, we, along with CBD, filed a lawsuit because California is completely lacking in any regulations to govern this activity. That would impact not only the Salinas River watershed, but also the area where this is happening on land owned by the BLM. Are two large reservoirs that supply water to San Luis Obispo County. So we really have multiple Central Coast counties immediately involved in this. And it's really important, I mean, it's encouraging that we have so many people in Santa Cruz proper knowledgeable about what the term encompasses, but it's time to begin to move that toward making our legislators aware of and involved in reining in this extremely exploitive technology.
You know, when I started reading the literature, kind of trying to get myself informed, better informed in fact, on this issue and process, the two things that really concerned me the most were really the environmental impact and the potential toxicity to animals and humans. And we've got a little clip we're going to show, I think, that illustrates that.
In 2006, filmmaker Josh Fox received a letter in the mail offering him $100,000 for permission to drill for natural gas on his land. He knew that in 2005, Congress had passed a bill exempting gas companies from environmental regulations. He wanted to know what impact the drilling would have on his land, so he took his camera across the United States to discover the truth about hydraulic fracturing.
The method of gas drilling they use is called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. It blasts a mix of water and chemicals 8,000 feet into the ground. The fracking itself is like a mini earthquake. The intense pressure breaks apart the rock and frees up the gas.
6 states have documented over 1,000 incidents of groundwater contamination.
It bubbles and hisses when it comes out. I won't drink it.
They can drill whether we like it or not.
It's a free-for-all. Our water was good before they started drilling, and when they got done, it was bad.
Obviously, we have a problem here.
The Colorado Oil and Gas Commission is aware of the situation and will probably be doing some additional testing in the area as soon as possible.
There's been concern raised about the methods to tap these valuable resources. They have been characterized as environmentally risky and inadequately regulated. Such reports are not accurate.
The neurological effects are very insidious.
Everybody was sick, including me. I have these lesions in my brain.
You get pains all over your body.
If you weren't able to do this hydraulic fracturing, how much more would we be dependent on foreign oil and terrorism?
I have one quote here from you that says that you're trying to do this in a way that doesn't damage the environment. But you also said recently that water contamination is inevitable.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Are those contradictory, or...?
Despite documented health risks and environmental impact, hydraulic fracturing is spreading across the globe.
It's amazing that what took Mother Nature millions of years to build can be destroyed in a few hours with a piece of heavy machinery.
What it's doing is searching for a problem that does not exist.
Whoa, Jesus Christ.
It's not supposed to do that.
Well, that's certainly some dramatic footage. Rose, can you give us some more details or specifics about the environmental impact or the possibility, potential of severe, perhaps irreversible toxicity to humans and animals?
Sure. Fracking threatens our environment in many ways. So one, a lot of people know about the water, and you talked a little bit about the water use, which is great. Hundreds of thousands of gallons to millions of gallons per frack job. So that can happen many times over in one well. And obviously more water for fracking means less water for people, agriculture, and wildlife. You have impacts to water, around water contamination. So particularly on the East Coast, as Pat was talking about, we have evidence of fracking fluids making their way into aquifers and drinking water sources. This can happen in a number of ways. You have surface spills, you have well casing becoming leaky, you have valve problems similar to what happened like in the BP oil spill. All of these ways in which the fracking fluid is making its way into water sources. It's another direct concern. You have pollution, air pollution that comes from these wells. You have impacts on wildlife. There are documented cases of wildlife and domestic animals drinking toxic fluid, toxic water in either wastewater ponds or from spills that happen and actually dying or becoming ill. And these chemicals, you know, that are used, we're talking about chemicals like benzene, which is a known carcinogenic, you know, and we have impacts on respiratory systems, skin. You saw some of the potential impacts there in the little clip from Gasland. So we could continue to talk about it, but another big impact here in California is the impact on our climate. And as I think most people...
We're all concerned about climate change, of course.
And we need to be, and we need to be deeply concerned. And so you have two concrete things that are happening, one of which is fracking releases huge amounts of methane, which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. It's about 105 times more powerful than carbon dioxide over a 20-year time frame. This is an area with these short-lived pollutants that we really need to cut down on immediately. And so that's one way. And then here in California, the final thing I think is important to note is what we're doing is fracking for oil mainly here in California. And what we need to be doing is moving away from fossil fuels and to open up potentially 14 billion barrels of oil to combustion. is a huge ticking carbon bomb right here in our Monterey area. And completely, you know, we have these goals around AB 32 that we all voted for and want to see implemented, and at the same time we're opening up new massive fossil fuel infrastructure going precisely the wrong way.
It's interesting that Santa Cruz has spent some considerable time developing their own climate action plan, and although there isn't the emphasis, I don't think, now in fracking in the city of Santa Cruz, Patricia can tell us, and will, I think we have a live call, but Patricia will be able to tell us more about what's actually happening, and almost with those folks out there. But this is a live call-in show, so we do have a caller on the line, do we? No, we don't. No, we don't? Okay. Then Patricia, give us a little more information. You had touched upon earlier about the basin and Aromas in that area and what kind of impacts that they're experiencing or can be expected to experience out there.
Well, in the two sites where this is currently has emerged in our area, one is publicly owned land that is controlled by the Bureau of Land Management, and they make it available to drilling companies through a lease process. In Aromas, that's all private land. And so I'm sure that it came as an enormous surprise to many property owners to receive letters offering to buy their mineral rights, because I don't think that most property owners would even otherwise have been aware that perhaps the deed to the property that they pay on every month does not include the property rights, and that those literally can be separated out, are legally separated out and available for sale. So we have this happening both on public land and on private land, and the enormous footprint of each one of these wellheads really cannot be understated. It's a whole pad, it's built up, as Rose has detailed. It's a dynamic physical process, the opportunity for leaks, the emission of methane, which isn't captured, is horrendous. The leaks that can happen subsurface as well as surface. And then the industry wants to make claims about reclaiming this slick water that they use. But what they do is create these enormous waste ponds that also consume huge areas, have the possibility of leaks, and migrating wildfowl will see that as liquid and land in it, and we will have our own mini Kestersons throughout the Central Coast with dead and dying poisoned wildlife if these counties do not act and the state of California doesn't act to effectively either rein this in or preferably ban it altogether.
And I know you're both more aware than I, because I'm really just learning as much as I think probably I should previously about this particular process. But when I went to the website for Aromas Cares for Our Environment, the ACE group out in Aromas, people are really experiencing this firsthand, and there's a tremendous amount of information on their website. They're tremendously engaged in this process. I know that they've been going to the San Benito Board of Supervisors meetings trying to get some regulation, and because heretofore it has not been regulated in California. Rose, can you speak to a little bit about the potential for some regulation, either regionally or in the state level?
Well, you are correct that not only is fracking completely unregulated in California by the state agency, it also is actually unmonitored. Right now there's just voluntary disclosure happening. So if a company wants to tell you that the well has been fracked, and it usually is after it's been fracked, they may report it on a website called Frack Focus, but they don't have to report it. They don't have to tell you they're fracking before, they don't have to tell you they fracked after, they don't have to tell you what chemicals they're using or not using. They don't tell you how much water they're using. All of this isn't currently not happening in California. Thus, there are moves afoot in the state to push some kind of at least disclosure, if not ultimately a ban. There are many different forces out there being discussed, many different things being discussed. The reality is, though, as it stands right now, we have no regulation, we have no monitoring, and we've seen communities like Aromas, like Culver City, like Baldwin Hills, stepping up to the plate and saying, okay, the state of California is not doing this, let's do it in our local community. So these grassroots community efforts across the state and actually across the country are very, very powerful. And I would agree with Pat, we were talking previously, we really need to, that's what needs to happen, is people need to stand up and say, not only not in my backyard, but actually not here in my community and my neighbor's community, et cetera. I think the other thing, so there is some regulations apparently being created by the state, but they are delayed. We haven't seen them. We fear that they will not, there's all sorts of rumors out there, and as I said, we haven't seen them, but we fear that, particularly given the grave nature of this, we are very concerned that they may not be enough to address the, they will likely not be enough to address the great risks available, and that's why we've really come to the conclusion that what we need to do is to ban this practice.
And as is so often the case, I think when you have state regulation over a process that probably isn't clearly understood by the legislators, they tend to underregulate it more than they do to overregulate it, and that's a tragedy in this situation because of the potential harm that can be done that is irreversible, really. You cannot really be able to backfill this and say, well, we'll be able to rehabilitate this particular area. Patricia, I know that you are active with the Sierra Club, and are they engaged in looking for legislative change or legislative opportunities for regulation?
Well, we've engaged in the lawsuit. We do have a statewide committee.
Well, tell us a little about the lawsuit. That would be interesting, I think.
Well, we're seeking to have this upcoming lease for the BLM land in southern Monterey County, to have it voided because of the risk to immediate residents as well as regional water supply. But I'm delighted that we had this Gasland clip because it's an extremely informative documentary, well done. It's available on YouTube, I believe.
And in fact, I think maybe we'll see a little more of it later, so people would be interested in that.
The Aromas people, they're accessible through Facebook. Aromas Cares for the Environment, or A.C.E. Rose's organization, the Center for Biological Diversity, is very engaged. There's another national organization, Food and Water Watch. This has really elicited appropriately, by the time you have people turning on their tap and their water catches fire, you really get their attention.
Well, and that's a very interesting subject. Rose, can you tell us a little bit more about this, the potential of this groundwater methane contamination, how that happens, what the obvious results for that would be?
Well, fracking releases enormous amounts of methane. And actually, we have a legal petition demanding that companies, that the government order companies to actually capture the methane, which they could sell. It's a little, because of the cheap price of natural gas, they've come to the, I guess, the economic conclusion that it's not worth their while. But it's enough natural gas, enough methane to heat like 1.7 million homes. So we're talking about a lot of methane. And so one concrete thing they could do today would be to simply capture that methane rather than vent it, which is currently what is happening. It's not being captured. And also on the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management auction that's happening, it's actually supposed to happen this Wednesday, December 12th. And we, along with a number of other groups, Food and Water Watch, Credo Action, 350.org, Earthworks, the club, many other groups will be out there in front of the BLM in Sacramento at 2800 Cottage Way at 9 a.m. on Wednesday the 12th. And we also would urge you to, if you can, call your congressman and ask them to at least delay this sale. What they've done in the environmental assessment of these lease auctions for the oil and gas drilling rights and fracking rights on this land have not evaluated the impact of fracking. And obviously, one of the things we're saying is that's one reason why this auction should not go forward.
And it's amazing to me that with the advances of methane recapture technology, it's so easy, so commonly used, why they just wouldn't recapture this methane and use it as a ready energy source is a little puzzling. There was another thing that I touched on earlier and that I would want to talk about is the seismicity, the possibility of your drilling down into the ground. You know, we were living in one of the most unstable areas in the whole world, and yet we are tampering with tectonic plating and going down into fissures and whatnot. Give us a little idea of what Center of Biological Diversity has been doing with that.
Well, there is a growing body of evidence that there is some connection between particularly wastewater injection deep underground and earthquakes that have happened particularly in Arkansas and Oklahoma. So much so that Arkansas, for a time at least, banned the drilling of new wastewater injection wells. So the Arkansas state government authority thought it was enough of a concern to ban the drilling of new wastewater injection wells. And so while this is still a growing area of study, there is concern and growing evidence that there are some connections, and particularly here in California, you know, it's like, I'm not sure that we want to take that risk.
No, of course not.
And fracking does create new fissures. I mean, that is exactly what it does.
Now, drilling down, it's, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes at 15,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. Now, how deep is this going? So to give us an idea of the possibility of it shifting some of the plating.
It can go thousands of feet underground. And, you know, part of the challenge here in California is that because the practice is unmonitored and unregulated, we don't know for sure. We know nationwide, for example, that there are 632 different chemicals associated with fracking. But we don't know for sure which ones of those are used in California, except we know some from the voluntary disclosure, but we don't know all of them. We don't know all of the places they're fracking, and we don't know all of this information that would help us evaluate just how great these risks are. We know what's happened on the East Coast, and we know what's happening in North Dakota, and we know what's happening in Arkansas and Oklahoma, but because of the lack of disclosure here, we really are operating in a vacuum.
And Patricia, is the Sierra Club as concerned as I certainly would be about seismicity or, in fact, radioactivity, those kinds of tangential effects that fracking might have?
The activists on this issue our immediate focus is on the seismicity, the fact that there have been these quakes happening in places that typically have had no history of quakes, with the exception of the Madrid Fault in Missouri. Much of the country, you know, being stable in the middle of the plate, does not have this history, and yet has been experiencing them as an apparent, or at least a possible consequence of all this fracking that's happened. So for us, it raises the bar in a known seismically active area, and the fact that they can frack at different levels, any level they choose, and the companies view their chemical concoctions as proprietary information. So they don't feel that they feel that it's like McDonald's secret sauce. They're not going to tell you exactly what's in it. Therefore, the public is endlessly vulnerable to this particular concoction, where it goes, how deep it goes, and typically they'll come down and then go horizontal, so it can also not only go thousands of feet deep, but it can go thousands of feet beyond the wellhead. And we are extremely concerned for the humans involved, the wildlife involved. If you look at aromas, that's not only family houses and small acreage, but some agricultural endeavors, nurseries, and so on. So it's an end for those people, potential end for those people, of being able to utilize that land, and for the community to have those products as well. We just think that, exactly as Rose said, that this is moving in entirely the wrong direction. We need to be weaning ourselves from fossil fuel, not getting more clever but duplicitous. and extracting more of it.
And a very good point. One of the things that did strike me is, again, as I say, I was reading through the literature, is that in Santa Cruz, and in California generally, water is such a precious resource. And here in Santa Cruz, we are now considering the construction of a desalination plant. The residents will have an opportunity to vote on that in 2014. And so the sustainability of our water supply, our whole water system, is really crucial to us, and yet this process seems to use a tremendous amount of water. And is any of this water potentially recycled? Is it just used in the process and that's it? It goes away? And is that an issue upon which the center and yourself have really given some thought?
Well, we're deeply concerned about that because, as you rightly point out, California needs water for people, California needs water for agriculture, California needs water for wildlife. On the East Coast, again, we have evidence of fish kills happening both through water contamination and from draining of rivers. More water for fracking simply means less water for all of these other needs. And while there are definitely folks who are out there working on different ways to recycle this water, I don't know about you, but I don't want my benzene-laced slick water and put through a Brita filter. I made that up. Okay, I don't know. But you know what I mean. But, it's like the reality is this is toxic stuff going down there. And while there are efforts being made to recycle that water, I personally haven't seen evidence that that's a realistic way to go.
So did I characterize that accurately in my introduction, that each time a well is fracked, it's 1 to 8 million gallons of water?
Well, that is nationally what I've heard is more like 2 to 7 million gallons of water. Well, but here in California, but you raise a really good point, which is in California we don't know. You will hear people say, here in California we use a lot less water for fracking. But again, because of the lack of disclosure, we really don't know what they're using, how many millions of gallons of water. And when I say a lot less, we're still talking about, at a minimum, hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per frac job. And with water being such a precious resource, it's just not one we can expend in this way.
Another thing that struck me as I read through literature was that now they inject with the water hydrochloric acid. Is that correct? They use that?
I'm not familiar with that in particular. I do know that there are 632 different chemicals that have been used in fracking, been reportedly used in fracking around the country. They are extremely, a number of them are extremely toxic. 40% of them can become airborne. They can have impacts on your skin, your respiratory, endocrine systems. They also, some of them are known carcinogenics like benzene, and can be cancer-causing, et cetera.
So another concept was this concept of flowback. Can you explain that a little bit? Do you understand? Apparently I saw something in that that was supposed to be one of the dangers of this particular process.
It is true that the water, this slick water used in fracking does come back up, can come back up. Some of it comes back up, some of it doesn't. And we have, again, on the East Coast where we know more about what's happening, you have evidence of spills, you have evidence of well casing leaking, you have evidence of valves failing. So you have a lot of different ways in which what is used in the fracking fluid is making its way either potentially above the ground or through fissures into areas you not intended.
I know, Patricia, as a local activist, you're as concerned as I am about the saltwater intrusion into our aquifers, any kind of contamination of our aquifers, because it takes them so long to be refreshed. It takes decades once an aquifer is contaminated anyway. And you were telling me about your concerns, especially out in the basin of Aromas in that area, that those aquifers really are threatened by contamination for any kind of a fracking process.
Well, this is all part of the Pajaro Basin, and there's, we have saltwater intrusion in Santa Cruz County all along our edge with the Monterey Bay, and how radically changing the resistance in these layers, how that would be affected and if that would result in saltwater intrusion is another question that's been asked and certainly not answered. I am looking forward to the advent of a new movie that Matt Damon has coming out on this issue of fracking that will hopefully introduce a wide spectrum of the American public to this issue and the impacts to homes and farms, introduce it into the language, because we are all truly at risk. Physically, financially, we are at risk by unregulated corporate behavior, unmonitored, no disclosure regulations, and the extent of this is truly frightening when you look at it. Certainly the methane, as we're all struggling to reduce greenhouse gases, trying to keep within the confines of AB 32, to have such an aggressive gas unleashed at these multiple sites, undoing decades of work and planning is extremely disheartening. I think we've all seen enough pictures of oil wells to understand the dynamic. They too are drilling down, looking for and hitting gas, and then it does erupt. So when you have this not only bringing up methane, but you have it bringing up this slick water, spilling and running everywhere, it's just a disaster for what is a water short state.
Certainly so, thank you. We have a question from one of our studio audience.
Hi, I did a little research on fracking, and the first thing that came up was there's a big conference in LA in January about how to make your first $1 million by blowing up our Monterey County underground. And it seems to me that, you know, when I hear about the big mess that this is going to make, you know, with all of this, you know, just total destroying of the underground and all the toxics that are going to be released, it's like, isn't that some kind of big nuisance? And aren't there laws against creating a public nuisance? And is that part of the lawsuits? And what are some of the things that people are doing to combat this?
Well, Rose?
You know, you're absolutely right, and there actually was a conference last week. I don't know if people saw this, but there was the conference last week about the big play of the Monterey Shale. It's happening, and the money's going to be there, and there are some very excited people about this. Having said that, there are a number of pieces of litigations that we filed with partners like the Sierra Club and many other groups. And one of them is to challenge this Bureau of Land Management auction next Wednesday. Another one we have is to argue that the state has not complied with the California Environmental Quality Act.
Which we're in the process of eviscerating anyway, but nevertheless, while we have it.
But this exactly proves why we desperately need to maintain the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. It is our hallmark environmental law here in this state. It is the reason the state, you know, doesn't look like a lot of other places.
But that brings up a very interesting question: is do not these particular fracking sites require any kind of an environmental impact report, either a programmatic or a project type environmental impact report in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA?
We believe they do, but they haven't been doing that. And this also relates to the unmonitored and unregulated. They haven't even been telling the state what they're doing, you know, much less doing an environmental assessment as required by CEQA. So we have filed a lawsuit saying that the state is in violation of CEQA by letting these wells go forward, frack jobs go forward without proper environmental review under CEQA. We also have a notice out to that they have not done proper environmental assessment under the Endangered Species Act. You know, these areas are home to the majestic California condor that we just brought back from the brink of extinction, and it would be tragic to see that condor come under the impacts of fracking, along with a number of other species. Actually, the 9 counties where fracking is set to expand are home to 100 already threatened and or endangered species. So that's precisely where fracking is set to expand, is where these species live.
And with you know, our AB 32 and that kind of thing, you know, one of the greenhouse gases is methane. Everybody understands that. So evidently we're producing all of this methane, and I'm wondering, you know, whether or not any kind of a climate action plan, either statewide or locally, would have some regulatory authority over that. Is the fracking process itself, let me understand it, is it particularly energy intensive? Does it create a very, very large carbon footprint in the process itself?
It definitely creates one, and I think methane is one of the biggest parts of the carbon footprint of fracking. I mean, you also have intense industrial development, as Pat was describing. You know, we're not talking just about the traditional vertical well. We're talking about a vertical well and a horizontal well, and that can also involve multi-pads, so you can have this well going out 7,000 feet that way, and you can have a pad here and a pad here. Much more industrial development can go with fracking. So all of those things are big pieces of a carbon footprint. And then, of course, you've got the 15 billion barrels of oil that will be burned if they are, you know, allowed to frack the Monterey Shale, and that oil actually becomes accessible.
Patricia, your thoughts on that?
Well, it should certainly, this process should certainly come under federal laws as well. Rose mentioned the ESA, Endangered Species Act, but certainly the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all of these, whatever someone's going to do on a piece of land, whether it's because they leased it from the BLM or engaged or got the mineral rights to private property, should certainly be in compliance with all of these state and federal laws. And this process, as so many seem to be, are driven by the corporations, driven by speculators, driven by the get-rich-quick, here's your chance to cash in methods. Those people go to the legislators first and try to position any legislation to not interfere or get ahead of the legislation, which is what's happening now. And to the degree that the public becomes aware, then they're going to be all over Sacramento trying to make sure that nothing interferes with them too much. And so it's really up to the public and solid nonprofit organizations like CBD to have the legal expertise to rein this in on behalf of the public, to trust, the public trusts the resources, the air, the water, the wildlife, all belong to the public, and they're all at risk with this.
And I think that's why it's so important for groups like ACE, Aromas Cares for Our Environment, because they are a grassroots organization delivering public testimony, citizen activism, you know, pushing the legislation forward. And we here in our area, as you know, now Bill Mawning is in the Senate. Mark Stone, a longtime environmentalist, former member of the Coastal Commission, is now in the Assembly. Those are the people we have to go talk to and explain to them that we cannot have this. We must have regulation on this. And so that's, I think, where the activism takes place fundamentally at a grassroots level. I do think that the lawsuits are a great vehicle for that, but also public activism, you know, and are we getting some traction, you think, toward getting some legislation here in your view?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We're only going to get that traction with an all hands on deck, all strategies, legal, grassroots, everything, media, you know, public talking about this, public education,
just like we're doing now.
Public conversation, but I do believe we are making traction. People, just that little clip we showed at the beginning here, I mean, I know it's Santa Cruz and people here are very aware, but fracking really, you know, hasn't been on the horizon here in California. It hasn't been on the radar here in California. So I think the fact that the people interviewed knew what fracking was and had concerns about it indicates to me that we are making headway, and with grassroots community groups like Aromas Cares, like the folks in Whittier, like the folks in Culver City, I do believe we will get something, but it's going to be a tough battle because, as our questioner from the audience pointed out, there is a lot of money to be made and a lot of people wanting to make that money.
Are we able to use as a model or a template the activism in other areas, other states that have achieved bans or some greater form of regulation in order to model our efforts after that?
Yeah, there's a lot of inspiration to be had out there. There's a new movie out. Speaking of movies, we have a lot of movies going on about this issue. So there's a movie called Dear Governor Cuomo, which is about the effort in New York. There's actually another film called Split Estate, which is about the issue that Pat was talking about, which is you may not own the mineral rights to the land you own. And then there's the Promised Land movie with Matt Damon, which I think will be the biggest commercial. It's coming out at the end of the month. You know, it's potentially Oscar worthy, and hopefully that also will raise public consciousness about the issue, along with the fact that, you know, we're getting more and more evidence of water contamination, air contamination, potential connection to earthquakes, and I think as more and more of this evidence, more and more studies come out, I also think that's going to shift public opinion.
Yeah. Let's at this time, maybe we can see a little more of that since we've been referencing this gas lamp so often, and it's such a wonderful illustration of what we're talking about. If we could see a little more of that particular video right now, that would be great.
You've probably seen ads on television hailing natural gas as the clean-burning transition fuel.
American shale basins contain an ocean of natural gas.
The method of gas drilling they use is called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. It blasts a mix of water and chemicals 8,000 feet into the ground. The fracking itself is like a mini earthquake. The intense pressure breaks apart the rock and frees up the gas. In order to frack, you need some fracking fluid, a mix of over 596 chemicals, from the unpronounceable to the unknown to the too well-known. The brew is full of corrosion inhibitors, gelants, drilling additives, biocides, shale control inhibitors, liquid breaker aids, viscosifiers, liquid gel concentrates.
Why is hydrofracking raising such concerns? The materials used for hydrofracking don't biodegrade. Once they're in the environment, they're in the environment to stay. If just 2% of these hundreds of thousands of wells go south in some way or another, that's thousands upon thousands of incidents, and I invite questions about that.
What Mr. Appleton is doing is searching for a problem that does not exist, because looking at all these other examples in all these states, there has not been a problem with hydraulic fracturing.
In less than a decade, the area became rapidly industrialized, with over 5,000 wells drilled. So going to Garfield County is like looking into the future of any area slated for drilling. It's also the subject of the first preliminary study on the health effects of gas drilling. 7 medical researchers from the University of Colorado studied the air and the water, finding acute problems from toxic emissions from gas development. So when I got calls from people in Garfield County, there were calls from people who had severe health problems.
This is Karen Truelove. She started getting massive headaches, getting really ill, feeling sick, and she said it got so bad that she didn't even plan her days anymore. She just tried to get through them. Then my friend Rick has benzene in his blood, toluene.
Tara was speaking for her friends that couldn't speak for themselves mostly because of non-disclosure agreements. People who were in lawsuits or who had settlements that stipulated that once they received their money, they could no longer go public with their stories. I kept getting in car after car, hearing symptom after symptom. My first day in Garfield County, I did 16 hours worth of interviews, and then finally, I got a chance to sit down with Theo Colborn, winner of 5 Rachel Carson Awards, a Time Magazine Environmentalist of the Year, and Congressional Fellow. Her accolades are too numerous to count.
We've begun to look at what's being used to drill a well, data that the government should be collecting but isn't collecting. We've been able to get our hands on some of that.
Because of the exemptions, fracking chemicals are considered proprietary, like the special sauce for a Big Mac or the secret formula for Coca-Cola. The only reason we know anything about the fracking chemicals is because of the work of Theo Colborn. By chasing down trucks, combing through material safety data sheets, and collecting samples, Theo has identified 596 different chemicals in 900 chemical products.
Every environmental law we wrote to protect public health is ignored. But the neurological effects are very insidious.
3 years ago, I started getting really dizzy.
So the question I have now is, you know, if the state is not going to protect us and we have to generate our own kind of grassroots movement, the lawsuits and this and that to try to get some regulation on fracking, what's the federal government doing for us?
Well, Sadly, in 2005, Congress passed what is called the Halliburton loophole, because Halliburton was the company that lobbied hardest for it. And it exempts fracking from the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is really a key piece of key protection for our drinking water. And we spent a lot of this past hour talking about our threats to our aquifer and our drinking water. So that's a huge problem. There's been some move to try to close that loophole, but that has not happened. And also, until recently, actually, the fracking process was exempted under the Clean Air Act. It wasn't regulated under the Clean Air Act. There is some new source performance standards under the Clean Air Act to deal with fracking pollution, which is great, but it doesn't cover oil wells. It doesn't deal with methane. So we continue, and it won't kick in until 2015. So sadly, the federal pieces of legislation, have not come to fore either. So. We really are looking, it's gone kind of state by state, and there's some states like Vermont that have banned fracking, there's countries that have banned fracking, and, we think California should be a leader in these areas. California claims to be a leader in protecting our environment, and we have tremendous environmental laws here, but they're only as good as they're enforced. And
Patricia, your thoughts on that?
Well, it's tragic that, but not a surprise, Halliburton certainly had a hand in the BP oil disaster. And they have attempted to create a climate very favorable to their various extractive industries. I cannot emphasize strongly enough what a threat this process poses to all life in the United States. The Tea Party has staunchly resisted any sort of control. Corporations rule, government of the, of by and for the corporations, the way they've corrupted the Gettysburg Address. And now that hopefully this very strong, clear statement has been sent to Congress, we hope that they are going to act better to close that loophole, to get off the back of the EPA, which they have tried to keep from enforcing clean air and clean water, meaningful standards, restricting lead, all these toxic byproducts of industrial activity. Hopefully they will have received this message loud and clear and will cooperate to take these vital steps to protect the public welfare, which is why we send them to Washington. So we would like them to do their job.
And I'm sure, as you know, Patricia, and you may know, Rose, our local Congressman Sam Farr, a great advocate for the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, a great environmentalist in his own right. Have you been able to engage him at all on this and have a conversation with Sam? Sam, if you're listening, this is very important.
Sam? If you could, I do know that some of Sam's constituents have been calling upon him to at least ask the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, to delay this auction that is happening on Wednesday, December 12th. So if people could call Congressman Farr's office and say that you support that, you support them, just at a minimum, let's delay this until we have an analysis of the fracking, what fracking could do to that area. And that is not at all a radical request.
No, of course not.
And so if people could do that tomorrow morning, call Sam Farr's office, that would be great. We'd appreciate that.
Yeah, because I have not heard Sam speak out on chemical fracking, and I think really it's an illustration of how new it is to people that this potentially very serious process is going to take place in their backyard, and with the potential of such great environmental impact and such potential to human toxicity and to animals, that I think now is the time to programs like this, or calling your congressman, or talking to Mark Stone or Bill Monning, to make them aware of that we're aware of what's going on, and that we don't want this to happen.
There's a huge irony here of all these 30 years of efforts to keep oil drilling from coming into the Monterey Bay Sanctuary, and yet basically now it's reared its ugly head on the lands adjacent to this sanctuary. And its impacts will not be confined only to the land and fresh water, because it'll make its way through the Pajaro, through the streams, through the Salinas, into the sanctuary.
And I think it's ironic as well that some of even our most conservative politicians in California have made careers out of opposing offshore oil drilling. Mm-hmm. Now's the time for them to step up and be opposed to onshore oil drilling. Mm-hmm. And this is the time for them to take a stand on that. You know, conservative or progressive, I think is something that we can all join into together. We only have a minute or so. Rose, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your work with the Center for Biological Diversity. We'll be looking forward to seeing how the lawsuits go, to how this grassroots activity and activism goes. Very important. Patricia, thank you so much for being here and for your work with the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club has done such great work in our area and all over California. They're a terrific organization. So again, thank you both for being here. This has been an extremely informative hour. And folks out there, this is just the beginning of a discussion on that. Make sure that you continue to have this discussion as often as you can, because it's extremely important. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if people are interested in getting more involved with either organizations, I think my number's been showing up and my email's been showing up on our website, biologicaldiversity.org, and Pat's website.
The Sierra Club, Food and Water Watch, Center for Biological Diversity, on their webpage. Call their office, tell them you care. We need people to be engaged and getting in the loop.
That's it.
We are going to have to join hands to stop this.
Well, no question about it. That sounds like a very good idea.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really terrific. Call one of those organizations, folks, and get involved.
First thing tomorrow.
First thing tomorrow.